Deus Ex Human Revolution was one of our favourite games of last year, thanks to its open-ended gameplay, deep engaging story and stylish trenchcoats. So much so that when the game was over, we still had a bunch of questions that needed answering. So we caught up with one of the game's writers, James Swallow, to do a bit of a retrospective. Here's what he had to say.
Hey everyone, I'm here with Jim Swallow, who's one of the writers on Deus Ex Human Revolution. Thank you very much for joining us, Jim.
It's great to be here.
So there are a few things that kind of were brought up when we were playing Deus Ex Human Revolution. We kind of wanted to go into more detail on. So there are a few things kind of hinted at about Adam's parents in the game. I mean, later on you meet that old woman who looked after Adam as a baby, and they hint at what happened to them and kind of Adam's childhood.
But Adam's parents, they started the fire. Yes, I remember that. They asked me to hide Adam. Then they started the fire.
Can you give us a kind of overview of what you were trying to get across there?
Well, Adam's a very deep, layered character, and we wanted to make sure that there was enough interesting stuff going on in his backstory to keep the player compelled and interested. So one of the things we wanted to do is not so much tell you who Adam Jensen is at the point you're playing him, but who Adam Jensen was. So once you pick up the character, you can decide what kind of guy he's going to be. So if you want to play the hero and you want to, save cats from trees and help the ladies across the street, you can do that. If you want to play a complete scumbag, stealing everybody's stuff or, blowing up cars and what have you, you can play that kind of guy as well. And the backstory element we put in there was just kind of give him a little bit of light and shade, so you understand that he had some darkness and mystery in his backstory, and just leave those kind of things lying there and let you maybe fill in the blanks yourself.
It's implied that Adam is special in some way. His DNA is the kind of reason that the augmentation technology takes off. Can you kind of clarify that situation for us? What it is about Adam that kind of makes him special?
Adam is what we call a super-receptor. The augmentation technology requires that you take a particular kind of drug called neuropozyne, and we base this on actual real research into real human augmentation technology, where scar tissue builds up around the electrode contacts, which actually stops artificial limbs from working. Adam has a super-receptivity, which means that he doesn't need to take the drug that stops the scar tissue from building up, and that's a very unique situation. He represents almost kind of a next generation of humanity who can accept human augmentation without having to worry about this additional problem.
Another thing that struck us about Deus Ex is how kind of lightly written the love story in the game is. There's this relationship between Adam and Megan, and they've broken up by the time the story has started. In the kind of the standard story, we'd expect them to get back together at certain points in the game. That doesn't happen. There's no kind of him getting the girl.
What are you talking about?
My great discovery. The genetic framework I found that makes it easier for living tissue to bond with implants. I found it. In you, Adam. I used your DNA.
Was that attempt to not kind of focus on that, to kind of not have that love story element in it? Was that a deliberate choice?
No, we deliberately decided that Adam wasn't going to have a happy ending in his relationship with Megan, because that's like real life. It doesn't always work out for you. The thing I really like about that relationship is that she's kind of moved on, but he really hasn't. If you look at it, I think Adam's still carrying a torch for Megan, and he kind of wishes that he could put things back the way they were, but she's kind of gone somewhere else. It's a kind of nice little flaw that he has, and I think it makes him a little bit more human at the end of the story. Of course, the thing is a lot of people really, really dislike the character of Megan because they feel like she treated him very, very poorly, and I have to say that perhaps there is some truth in that.
There's a lot of different endings. There's 4 different endings to Deus Ex Human Revolution, and as those endings play out, you see the consequences of your actions on the world, but not on the characters. Why did you make that decision, not to show how the outcomes on the characters?
Well, actually, there's more than 4 endings. There's the 4 choices that you have in the game, but there are a number of kind of tiny little marker points all through the course of the storyline, which are sort of hidden, buried in the system of the game. Choices that you make as a player, whether you take more human choices or you take more kind of, shall we say, cold-hearted choices. The reason we wanted to show that is that the choice that Adam makes at the end of the game is a global choice. Right. He goes through the story arc, and his personal journey reflects the larger journey. Adam is a character who's had control taken away from him because he gets augmented against his will. And the larger story is about the bad guys taking control away from everybody. So in a way, the small story reflects the large one. And at the end, it's the large story that is kind of occurring. So we wanted to sort of put our focus on that.
Do you feel that one of the endings is the kind of the canon ending, the canonical one?
Well, there's the ending that I wrote I remember when we were first putting this together, we had 3 endings originally. And I'm proud to say that I came up with the nihilistic ending, which was the everybody dies ending. So to me, personally, I think that's the canonical ending. But in a way, we try to set it up so that any ending that plays out will hopefully be able to connect to the greater Deus Ex world. So there really isn't like one perfect choice. It's not like this is the right choice. Yeah. It's the choice that's right for you as a player.
Speaking of game endings, we've had the Mass Effect 3 ending recently where they famously changed the ending. It was almost a crowdsourced ending, kind of based on feedback. How do you feel about that as a writer?
Well, it's an interesting situation. I haven't played it myself, so I can't really make a value judgment on it. I've heard some people say that they felt the ending was unsatisfactory. I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed in the idea of being kind of railroaded into changing an ending. I think if a writer writes an ending, that's the ending. And if you don't like it, you have the right to say you don't like it. But I think it's a little unfair to go, no, I didn't like it, please change it.
Does Square Enix have access to the kind of telemetry where they know the choices that people are making when they're playing the game? I mean, is that fed back to the developers? Do they know what people are choosing when they're finishing the game?
I don't know if we can read it. I don't think so. It would be kind of cool, though, to see how many people chose what ending.
Would that be the sort of thing that would affect the way you would write it, knowing the way that people play? For example, writing another installment of the series, would it kind of affect the way you go, 75% of people chose this ending, that's interesting that they're interested in that?
I don't know, I wouldn't want to do that, because I think you'd be in danger of kind of like funneling your story into one particular direction, and there's always going to be one person who doesn't want to choose that ending, and you shouldn't penalise that one person for not picking the one that the 75% of the people did.
Now, obviously, you know a lot about Deus Ex, you know a lot about the lore. Is there anything you think that's particularly interesting that maybe people haven't picked up on, or something that people don't focus on that you think is interesting about the franchise that is particularly important to you?
Well, that's a good question. The thing I love about Deus Ex, the whole world of it, is that the guys at Ion Storm created this really fantastic, dramatic, compelling, deep world. We put a lot of depth and texture into the game, and I've felt that players I've spoken to have really pretty much explored every nook and cranny. There's certainly stuff I wish we could have done more stuff with. One of my favourite characters in the game is Farida, the VTOL pilot. I would have loved to have done more storyline with her, but at the end of the day, we packed a lot in and we didn't have the opportunity to put more story in.
6 months is a hell of a short time to come back from the dead.
Since then, a lot's happened in kind of human augmentation. We've had the Paralympics recently. It's become kind of right at the forefront of the news. Has a lot changed there since when you started? Are attitudes different, and would that impact the way that you kind of would look at augmentation if you were coming to the project now?
Definitely. It's funny, Oscar Pistorius, the Blade Runner, as he's called. When we were writing the original backstory lore for a timeline, we wanted to do a timeline from the present day to 2027, and Oscar Pistorius was a character that we wrote in, as like, let's take this guy from the real world and figure out how his augmentations would have affected things. And then stuff started to happen in the real world that was catching up to us while we were in the process of writing the game, about having him being at the Olympics and how that would affect the perception of augmented people. And it's crazy for me, watching the Olympic Games, seeing him there and thinking, I'm writing about this guy a couple of years ago, and here he is. And people watching this are perceiving him and are changing the way they think about augmented people.
There was an exhibition at the Welcome collection recently. I don't know if you went and saw that, but it was all about human augmentation, and that it was packed out. People are fascinated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. When I heard about that, I was tweeting about it and saying, everybody who loves the game, please go along and see this thing, because this is exactly what we were writing about. It's almost like the real world's kind of catching us up. Hopefully we won't find out that everything's being ruled by the Illuminati, but the technology and the perceptions of it, it's fascinating to me, and it's really great to be able to write science fiction that connects to real world elements and real world issues like that.
And finally, just on the subject of science fiction, I just wanted to ask what other video games you think are doing science fiction well at the moment. I know you mentioned Halo as a particular example.
I think Halo's and Mass Effect certainly too is, I think, great examples of classic space opera. I'm a big fan of ray guns and spaceships, sci-fi, of stuff blowing up, and we don't get an awful lot of that now on television. It used to be we'd get a lot of sci-fi TV shows. Now it's kind of more urban fantasy, more kind of real world sort of sci-fi stories. And I think video games have become the go-to place if you want to see massive epic scope and big spaceships and cool stuff exploding. But in terms of in games with fascinating storylines and science fiction or science fiction, science fantasy storylines, I'm really fascinated by what Dishonored looks like, because that clearly has a lot of DNA with the original Deus Ex, and the world seems really fascinating and compelling to me.
Great. Jim, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.